In year 2024, I changed jobs twice, which means that I onboarded as a product manager in two different organizations in year 2024. Both were great opportunities, but how I onboarded in both roles couldn't have been more different. The first organization was in person, while the second was remote. And that difference in and of itself changed how I approach my 90-day completely. Of course, with a little bit of learning from the previous one for the. And that difference changed how I approach my first 90 days in both roles. Not because one was better than the other, but because both demanded different things from me. So in this video, I'll walk you through the 5 things that I did differently in both onboarding processes and how they've shaped how I think about starting strong as a product manager in a new organization. It might be helpful for you as well. If you've ever started a new role as a product manager, I'm sure you've thought about how do I make impact fast? How do I make impact fast? How do I maximize my 30, 60, and 90 days? This video is for you if that's the question on your mind. So let's dive in. Let's get into it. Firstly, I'll talk about following an onboarding schedule versus designing my own onboarding plan as I went along. In the earlier role, onboarding meetings were already organized and set for me before I even resumed. Every meeting, every person that I had to talk to, every intro call was already scheduled before I started. So it was efficient and it made my first few weeks very easy, just settling in and following the calendar invites to talk to the people that the organization thought were necessary for me to succeed in my role. But in the later role, nothing was pre-planned. Nothing was pre-planned besides the IT call that you typically have to set up your computer on the first day. I had to figure out who I wanted to talk to. What I wanted to learn from them, and where influence really sat. And so the second role forced me to observe a lot and decide on my own path, even though the first role was more efficient in getting me started very quickly. The second role forced me to think about if I wanted to meet someone, why I was meeting them. The second role forced me to think about if I wanted to meet someone, why I was meeting them and not just checking a box. Now why is this different relevant? The first experience taught me that structure gets you started and going really fast, which is really great, especially when you need to jump in and get things done very quickly. But autonomy helps you internalize context and set your tone. That's what I learned from the second role. By designing my own onboarding in the second role, I found that I actually built relationships that mattered to my context and understood how decisions were made. By designing my own onboarding in the second role, I found that I built relationships that actually mattered to my context and understood how decisions were made, not just who made them as I went along. Even though the second onboarding required me to stumble a bit and find the people that I wanted to talk to and discover the people that I naturally wanted to talk to as I went along, I found that there were some tips that helped me as I went through the process. The first tip is you need to create a learning log. List what you don't know yet. Every question that comes from a conversation is a clue about somebody you need to talk to or a conversation you need to have. Secondly, over-communicate with your manager weekly. Remember, if they didn't set the onboarding schedule for you, they don't know who you're talking to. And so it's important for you at the end of every week, if possible twice a week when you start, let them know who you're having a conversation with, what you're learning, who they think you should talk to, and what are the challenges that you're facing. So that's very important early on to over-communicate your onboarding process with your manager, especially if they did not set it and you're setting it by yourself. Share what you've learned, share who you've met, share where you think there are gaps, and ask them for feedback on if you're headed in the right direction with the conversations that you're having. That will help you guide you That would help your manager guide you better. And the last tip that will help for onboarding is join as many calls as possible. Whether your onboarding calls have been set for you or you're figuring out onboarding by yourself, as long as there's a conversation, join as many calls as possible and ask people to add you to calls. Ask them that you just be a fly on the wall to listen in on conversation and absorb as much context as necessary. And absorb as much context as necessary. This will help you to quickly learn who knows what and where important conversations happen. This will help you to quickly learn who knows what and where important conversations are happening. The second thing about the onboarding processes that were vastly different was relying on proximity versus practicing intentional visibility. Now, remember I said the first role was in person, and in in-person work models, you pick up context passively. Hallway chats, overhead stand-ups, quick whiteboard moments. That proximity gives you accidental insights, which is so helpful for learning. But in fully remote organizations, I realized that those casual moments disappear naturally. I had to become more proactive. I joined optional Slack channels that I had no business being in, and I asked to sit on calls. I made it a habit to share summaries of what I've learned more broadly. The thing is, visibility is really relevant in a remote role. Everybody is in their basement, is in their home office doing their thing. They naturally do not see you unless there is a cause for a conversation. So visibility in a remote role is not really about being seen, obviously, physically. When you know what people are working on and when people know what you're working on and how you think, alignment happens faster in remote roles. A couple of tips for intentional visibility when you're in a remote role is fine-tune your notifications for optimization. Get alerts for relevant and social channels that you can join and engage in discussions early. Even small Slack interactions helps you build trust. Chime in on a conversation that is ongoing, even if you're trying to say, I'd like to learn more about this. Give that thumbs up and that emoji. Let them know that you're here, you're in support of the conversation going on. Another tip for visibility in remote roles is document gaps as you go along. If something isn't written down and was just told to you on a call or a conversation, volunteer to capture it and validate it with others. That way, you're helping somebody else that might be onboarding after you. You're also establishing your knowledge and being visible to the rest of your team. Another tip for visibility in remote roles is to ask to listen in. Like I mentioned earlier, most people will actually say yes if you frame it politely as a learning opportunity, not just an oversight from you. So ask politely to listen in on calls and promise to not say anything, just opt to listen in. Most people will have you in on their calls if you just opt to listen in. Those little opportunities to listen in on calls makes you more visible. The third difference was around measuring early progress by outcome versus by clarity. My first 90 days in the earlier role was very simple and clear. Hit a particular metric, ship a particular feature, prove value fast. I think timing also played a factor here because it was the beginning of the year, and so goals were just set and they were needed to be executed on very quickly in order to gain some traction and quickly indicate on whether there were some concerns and alignment. So my onboarding was really about laser focus on those goals and validating that we're headed in the right direction. However, in the later role, particularly because it was towards the end of the year, there was more room for me to focus on my rate of learning and my speed to clarity so that I could make more informed mid to long-term calls over the next year. Again, neither was better than the other. They were just different as a result of the timing and business stages and business goals. This mental shift stopped me from focusing on deliverables and outcomes early in the second role and helped me connect dots so that I could be armed with all the information to make decisions much later. Now, both mindsets are valid. Early year roles benefit from momentum. Late year ones benefit from reflection and clarity. The key here is adjusting what your onboarding progress means based on timing and the business context. A couple of tips for measuring your clarity as you onboard is, after about 30 days, decide that what you want to understand is the product team, how decision flows, and protecting what works at all costs. Your first 30 days is not where you want to propose strategic overall changes to the product or the business model. By day 60, you want to understand the users more. You want to understand trade-offs and what drives outcomes for the users and for the business. You want to start collating ideas around small bets and quick wins, and you want to start learning more and validating hypotheses that already exist within the product organization. By the 90th day, you want to understand what success looks like in the next year or in the next quarter at the least. Start collating ideas around bigger bets that you want to learn more about and you want to validate. The fourth difference in both onboarding process was around spending more time with engineering partners versus less time. In the later role, I realized that my biggest blind spot wasn't around how we build or even predictability around delivery, which was still there, but it wasn't my biggest blind spot. But it was about finding out what was worth investing our time in and validating that it was worth investing our time in. While there was definitely an element of that in the previous role, there was also an early focus on delivering outcomes, which necessitated that I spent more time with the engineering team managing delivery in the earlier role. So I, in the much later case, spent more time with the sales team, with the customer success team, with the partnership team, and domain knowledge experts, understanding how customers talk about the product, what drives deals, and what creates friction for users, and also how feedback flows into the product roadmap. The later role also involved understanding how we can enable the go-to-market teams and everything involved in deciding what makes sense to invest in as a business. Now, why is this difference relevant? Product problems live in different places depending on the company stage. Sometimes they're in delivery, sometimes they're in discovery, sometimes they're in go-to-market. And understanding how much you want to overextend yourself in the entire life cycle is important for you as you onboard. Balancing all those perspectives, engineering, go-to-market, sales, helps you see the full picture. A couple of tips that are helpful depending on wherever you are spending a lot of your time during onboarding is ask why relentlessly. When the go-to-market team raise issues, ask them why. When the engineering team raise issue, tell them that's interesting and ask them why. Go beyond symptoms into root cause of problems and challenges that teams bring up to you. Again, shadow as many calls that you can. Shadow calls with customers, shadow internal calls, shadow calls with your users. It's important to take in as much context as possible, irrespective of how your onboarding is being designed. And lastly, loop insights back to the engineering team. Anything that you figure out with respect to strategy and alignment and direction from the leadership team or from the go-to-market team, you need to always find a way to how we connect the dots to what is being executed with the engineering team. Number 5, which is a major difference in my earlier onboarding and the later onboarding, was that in a remote, fast-moving environment, I had to write everything down. Rewriting product requirement documents, capturing collective context that did not exist, updating product briefs for new ideas, decision logs, recap notes, sharing memos on trade-offs that we decided. I just found myself documenting a lot because that tends to happen a lot in remote roles. Decisions are made on the fly and then we forget to capture the context. But like I mentioned, opting to document gaps in understanding is a helpful way to onboard, and I think everybody should do that when they're onboarding into a new role. Besides the fact that some knowledge lived in people's heads and needed to be captured, I find that writing is proof of work for thinking, and so it's an easy way for me to learn and capture the context that exists in everyone's head or as a collective. This is also relevant because in-person collaboration runs on conversation, remote collaboration runs on documentation. And when those documentation gaps exist, it makes remote work much more difficult. Neither is better, like I said, they just scale differently. And it's not a way of saying that documentation is also not necessary in person, but it makes remote work a lot easier when things are well documented and understood. Writing things down creates shared context and mutual alignment. A couple of tips for documentation: use AI tools for capture. Use Zoom AI Companion, Notion AI, Copilot, whatever it is that can help you summarize discussions very quickly would be helpful. Secondly, write fast and refine later. I particularly like to write keywords that prime me for a conversation in a physical notepad with a pen. Don't aim for perfection, just aim for clarity and findability, whatever works for you. And lastly, organize around clarity. Group your notes by decision, by theme, by feature, by initiative, whatever helps your team to find things very easily would also be very helpful, especially in remote roles. So that's it. Those are the main things that I learned after onboarding into 2 different product management roles in 2 different organizations in 1 year. Like I said, none of the approaches are bad or good, they are just different. Each reflected the company's culture, the company's structure, timing, and the business needs at that point in time. The first taught me how to execute fast and onboard fast within a clearly defined system, while the second taught me how to create and build confidence for solid decision making. And together they showed me that great product managers don't have a single playbook for onboarding. What they have is range. If you're starting a new product manager role this year or anytime soon, don't chase for the perfect 30, 60, 90-day plan. Adapt it. Start with curiosity, communicate deliberately, and document everything. And that's how you turn any onboarding, structured or not, into momentum that lasts. One other tip is, if you're stepping into a new product manager role, don't rush to prove yourself with deliverables. Start by building clarity, relationships, and context, because that's the real foundation of product impact.